So that's a
I just did the math. It's
what is it?
17,500.
That's your estimate for a single night. Even if you said 10,
It's
it
still
would still, it would be enormous. And if you think about it, it's an iceberg that's under the water. And whenever we look at the number of people who are arrested in El Paso for DWI, we're really just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Talking About It. And today we are talking about something that affects every community, every generation, and probably a family close to you in one way or another. And that is drinking and driving. Most of us know it's dangerous. We've seen the consequences, we've seen Fit Fam, and yet it's not getting any better. So, in order to maybe get some type of answers as to how we can start to fix the problem, how we can bring awareness to certain things, we are joined today by uh, Matthew Duran, a founder of El Paso Crime Lab and a PhD student in criminology. Through his work, Matthew studies crime trends, public safety, and the factors that influence human behavior. Today, we are going beyond headlines to better understand the issue and what solutions might actually make a difference. So, welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for taking the time today to come on and have this conversation. The work that you're doing, I started seeing it pop up and I was like, numbers. I'm a nerd, so I really, I really love it.
It was a little out of control. I think in like over the course of a month, I created the page and I just started spitting out a bunch of charts. And it surprised me too. I really didn't know what was going to happen, but I found that a lot of people I just found a lot of interesting things that I thought were really helpful. And, I'm glad that you found it, and we're talking about it today.
Yeah, thank you. And Matthew, if you'd like to just give tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you are from El Paso, right?
Right. Yeah. So my name is Matthew Duran. I'm from El Paso, Texas. I did not have a linear trajectory to where I am now. I started off as a detention officer at the sheriff's office for about a year. I was 21. Decided to, try to jump into something else. I ended up going back to school, studying criminal justice, working as a crime analyst at the police department in El Paso. And then at that time, that's when I made the big jump to pursue a PhD, and I was able to get a really great like almost like a gift at Arizona State University to study full time and have a part time job there. So currently, I'm a fourth year PhD student at Arizona State University in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. I'm also a part time research assistant at the Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety,
Wow.
where there's just a range of projects that we are involved in. But broadly, it's about helping organizations, government and non-government, solve or reduce violent crime in particular. So that's me, and I'm currently working on a dissertation, which is like the big research project in order to get the PhD.
Yeah.
And I guess the best way I've found to procrastinate is to try to help the city that I'm from.
Procrastination. Isn't it crazy what good work comes out of procrastination though? Like I'm a master procrastinator, so yeah. Some of my best work has come from that. So
And
I
no,
think you know what it is? I think it's because we get so focused into whatever the work is that we're doing that having something on the side to kind of pull us out of it opens up perspective, right? You're not focused on every little moment and then you can go back to it kind of with fresh eyes. So maybe that's what it is. But yeah, you're doing such great work. What sparked your interest specifically with the crime and prevention and the work that you're doing?
you know, it, I think since I was in high school, I think I always like, they have you take these tests on like what kind of career might be the best fit for you. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I was always scoring at some point in public safety or some form of public service, being a civil servant. And to me personally, I just find the work kind of gratifying, helping out, whether, it was as a detention officer or as a crime analyst or what, even as it is now, which is, not getting paid to do this type of thing, but just doing something that might help others. To
Yeah.
me, that's kind of the mission of it all, is just trying to help people solve an important problem. And I find that gratifying.
Yeah, I agree. I think that finding a purpose outside of whatever it is that you're doing is very important. It's gratifying, it's fulfilling. Um and so I guess let's see. So for somebody who doesn't know necessarily what criminology is, can you let them know just quickly what criminology is?
Thank you for asking that, because I never tell people I'm a criminologist because it's such a vague word. I think a lot of people, like you said, what does that mean? And broadly, it can mean a lot of things. It's kind of like in psychology. There's all these different special branches there's cognitive psychology, social psychology. That is how criminology has kind of
Mhm.
splintered into. And broadly, what it all has in common is we're looking at people who are breaking rules, or on the flip side, people who are following rules and trying to understand why they do what they do.
Okay.
It's almost like a mix of psychology, sociology, even economics. That's kind
Yeah.
of what I love about this field, is that you have there's a lot of like cross-disciplinary thinking that goes on. So but really what it all should have in common, if you want to call it criminology, is you're studying people who do break rules or don't break rules.
Yeah. I think it's just so fascinating. I've always kind of been into that aspect of it. I started a few classes in criminology, and school's just hard for me. Like school's just I think school's hard for everybody, but yeah, it's something that I felt like once I started doing the courses for it, I was like yeah, I like lost interest, and so I just kind of was like it's okay. I'm good. I'm good. So
I,
for you to like, and I say I'm a nerd, but I think because it's like reading the encyclopedias when I was a kid, like that was my. I'd rather do that all day than be in school learning whatever they were teaching us at that time. So I just like gathering information and data on topics that I am interested in. And so the fact that I was able to find your page was super awesome because your numbers, you're talking about criminology, which is all aspects of why figuring out why people commit crimes or why they break rules or and I think that that's so fascinating. I think a lot of it too, just with my background, is the mental aspect of it. I think that it's all kind of tied together regardless of what the crimes are. um I was a terrible kid. I was for me not being a rule breaker, I was a rule like I would get right to the line of rule breaking. And then like, whenever I did get in like real trouble, it was because I was with a group of people and I was like the last one to decide to leave because I was like trying to take care of everybody. So yeah, I it's just a whole mental thing. But anyway, so okay, let's get back on track, Ash. So how can understanding the crime or the data behind your work help communities solve problems or begin to implement things that might solve problems?
That's a great question. And so that question that you're getting at, what is data and how can it help us figure this out? One of the things I want to be very clear on is that data is limited. Every data set that you come across, the crash data is what I use to try to understand drunk driving, the problem of drunk driving. Um, there is just always some degree of error in data. And I can give you a really good example. If I stand on my scale right now at home, I'm gonna see a number, right? I don't know what the number is because I don't have a scale, which I should. There's not. I don't have a decimal point. It's those analog scales,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not getting a really precise measurement of my weight. If you take your temperature with a thermometer, there's the same thing. There's always like some variation in the accuracy it has about whatever it is it's trying to measure. And so when you look at crash data, when you look at any data, arrest data, um, there is always some degree of misrepresentation, and that is such an important detail. And I've had a lot of people that I've started having conversations about the crash data in El Paso, from the police department, and then the Texas Department of Transportation. They are the people that can tell you all of the limitations way better than I can. But um, ultimately, even though there is some error, there's always going to be some error in data. It doesn't mean that it can't be useful. And so one of the things that is very clear in the month I've spent looking at it is there are patterns. There are just some very obvious patterns. And I'll just give you one quick example. When we look at the location, the coordinates of where crashes occurred in El Paso, and these are crashes that were considered alcohol involved, where one of the drivers was suspected to have been drinking. We see that this is not a random distribution of crashes throughout the city. We see that they are concentrated in certain areas. And to me, that is like that, maybe those coordinates might be a little bit off, but that doesn't mean that information can't be useful. And so that's one example of how, knowing where crashes occur comes from the data. And we can easily think of several ways on how we can make that information useful and trying to prevent the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I was looking at your graphs and I was looking at the districts and I was like, okay. And then I was trying to like figure out, all right, with those coordinates, how many bars are in the area? Is it freeways? Is it side streets? Is it back roads?
Right.
And yeah, I just think, and then kind of also going back to what you said about, you can have the data, but there'll always be some variations of it. It's like everything, it's like any conversation that you have, you're not able to get all of the information. You're kind of having to piece together information from different aspects. But I think what is done very well is focusing specifically on this one area, which is drinking and driving, and being able to kind of really dig into the information that you have, because sometimes there's information there and people just don't know how to collect the data. So having somebody like you who is kind of looking from the outside in, if you will, it's
Mhm.
really, really fantastic the work that you're doing. And so let me ask, I guess, the big question, which if you live in El Paso, you know the answer to this question. How big is the drinking and driving problem here? Um, and let me ask, do you have, I mean, you're focusing on El Paso, so let's just stick with that. Like, how big of a problem is that here specifically?
We can zoom out before we get to El
Can
Paso.
you? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like, nationally, do you have like an idea?
we do. We have several data points. So, um, drunk driving is. I'm not going to use the word DWI because I want to be clear. DWI is the name of an arrest charge, right? That is by the police. When we're talking about drunk driving, we're talking about people who get behind the wheel who are severely impaired from alcohol and they crash their vehicle. In the United States, we have annual surveys that are national surveys where we get a representative sample of the U.S. population and we make estimates about various things. I mean, this is not just limited to drunk driving. This is across the board for public health you know, problems and whatnot. But when it comes to drunk driving, we have a specific national survey that asks a lot of questions about alcohol use. And among those questions are several that relate to driving under the influence. And so in the United States, we know for a fact that it's not a small wave of people that do this. It is a tsunami. It
Yeah.
is an incredible amount of people in the millions. I wish I could give you the number right now, but some of the estimates that I've read are just startling. And what we do know, what we have a very, that we have this idea of a population, right, of people who drink and drive that is self-reported. So going back to data,
Mhm.
there's a limitation there. But if we go off of of what we do have, right, the number of people who self-reported that drink and drive, it's enormous. And if you look at the number of people who are arrested for driving while intoxicated, the number of people who are arrested for DWI in the United States, we estimate that it's anywhere from less than 1% to 3%. of all people who were driving under the influence in a single year. Um,
Jeez.
it's a lot. It's a lot.
That's a lot.
And we can do a very, very quick thought experiment to figure out what that number is in El Paso. So I looked it up last night. In El Paso in the year 2024, there were over 350 licensed alcohol establishments. So bars or restaurants, if you will, that sell alcohol, or stores that sell alcohol. Um, I want you to imagine that it's Friday night. We're outside of a bar in El Paso, and we're watching people go in. At the end of the night, there's going to be people leaving that are legally intoxicated, and they're going to get behind the wheel and drive. So, Ashlee, let me ask you this: and I've asked other people this before. How many people do you think are going to leave a bar in El Paso on Friday night legally intoxicated and get behind the wheel? What's that number?
From one bar?
From one bar, yeah, one bar on a Friday night, a single Friday night.
I would
The
say at
average,
least half. So we'll say like 50 people.
okay, so if 50 is your number, take 50 and multiply it by 350 bars, right? And that's a single night, right? If you look at the number of people who are arrested for DWI by the El Paso Police Department,
Jesus.
right? So that's
I just did the math. It's
what is it?
17,500.
That's your estimate for a single night. Even if you said 10,
That's
it
still,
would be enormous. And if you think about it, it's an iceberg that's under the water. And whenever we look at the number of people who are arrested in El Paso for DWI, we're really just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We're according to the estimate you gave, we're only seeing about less than 1% of all the
1%.
people who are driving while intoxicated. Um, so to answer your question, maybe we don't actually have that estimate in El Paso, but it doesn't take. Um, I think it's common knowledge. I think we can be safe to assume that it is an enormous amount of people. And when the police department or when other people say that we can't arrest our way out of this problem, I mean, we really can't. If we told the
Yeah.
police department we want you to triple the number of arrests that you can make, we're going to be out of police officers in 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I think that that brings us to a huge part of the conversation, right? Because that's the one thing I see all the time. So again, I revert back to FitFam. For those of you that listen outside of El Paso, FitFam is this social media page that basically has become a hub of information where El Pasoans send information, tips, video, all kinds of things to them, and they report it. So it's just this huge platform, and I mean, even some of the news stations when they're reporting, they're using FitFam footage, or that was sent to FitFam. So just going off of that, a lot of the comments are always, "PD, where are you?" And I think that like you're saying, that's just kind of surface. There's no way to really. I think I asked you about the checkpoints, like what, and it was a recent question, so I don't know if you have had time to look into it, but like before in the 90s when there was a checkpoints, and what checkpoints were back then was, I don't think it was necessarily focused on drinking and driving. I think that it was like they would ask you for like your driver, like just to make sure that you have a license, insurance, and they would kind of post up randomly, and you would be stuck in a checkpoint. So I didn't know if we were able to get the data, because I feel like people always talk about bringing the checkpoints back. They were outlawed in Texas. Outlawed, is that, do you say that? Is that the right word? I don't know. But they stopped doing it in Texas because they were saying that it was like a violation of rights, because you were basically like there was no probable cause, I guess. Like I don't know the right verbiage for it, but I think summing it up, that's kind of what it was. Like you can't just go there and try to set people up, right? I guess that's the easiest way to say it. I was trying to see what the data was prior in the 90s when we had checkpoints versus now, like the what you said, 2024 information. And then also the access to alcohol and establishments. So right now you're saying there's 350 bars licensed. Like was it the same back then when we had the checkpoints? Has the access increased? Was the checkpoints something that helped to kind of not have those numbers as high as they are now?
Well, a lot of this is going to sound very unhelpful, but I think it's really important to say this. There is so much that has gone on in El Paso that, like you said, the checkpoints. The answer is I have no clue if it was
Mhm.
effective or not, and the reason why is because when those response strategies were going on, we didn't have the data readily available, or we
Mm,
just didn't have the analytical capacity at the time to evaluate the effectiveness of those strategies. So retrospectively, when I look at the crash data that's publicly available, I can go all the way back to 2016, and at 2016 is where it stops. Prior to then, it's it would take a lot of I mean, at that, it's just not systematically organized, or reporting practices were changing. And so this is just one of those things where if you want to look at something across time, you have to kind of measure it the same way over
gotcha.
time. And crash data is really robust. Uh, we can go back decades. But as far as what's currently publicly available in the state of Texas, in El Paso, we can only go back all the way to 2016.
Mm,
So that is the limitation. But what you're talking about with checkpoints, there are several evaluations that have tried to estimate the impact it has on alcohol-related traffic fatalities or crashes. And the findings are pretty consistent when it comes to checkpoints, that they do reduce the number of alcohol-related crashes. And these numbers are not, I mean, these evaluations show, from what I've seen, if I can remember correctly, it's a small medium effect, about 6% to 16% reductions, which is still, some people are expecting this huge drop. And in my opinion, any sort of meaningful drop is, as even if it's
yeah,
5%, is still progress,
for sure. And I think too, a lot of it is like, I don't know. I again, I'm 45, so I always go back to think like, well, how it was. But I
Yeah.
think that back then there was a lot more preventative measures going on, even from high school, from elementary school. You had McGruff going to the schools and talking about like don't drink and drive, or you'd have commercials where it's like this is your brain on drugs, any questions, you know what I mean, like yeah. And then like even in the TV shows like the Saved by the Bells, the Full House, like all of those TV shows dealt with, drinking, smoking, doing these things. And I think that we've lost a lot of it. I also think, and maybe this is kind of leading to my next question, is what are the ages or like the demographics really of people who are drinking and driving, just from what I see, the mugshots on Fridays. So again, back to FitFam. On Fridays, they have a mugshot drop of people who were arrested for DWIs. And 5 o'clock, people will log on and see if they know anybody. It's a sad thing. And then if you do see somebody, you're like, dang. And then you think about, oh, well, most of these people are around my age, right? So like 30s, 40s. So maybe those shows didn't help. If that's what the case is. Can you share numbers as far as age in these DWI crashes?
Yeah. So um, the age breakdown of people. So what we're talking, when you say DWI crashes, right? We're talking about crashes that
Oh, I'm
involve.
sorry, drunk driving, right? Is that what we're
Well, it's here's the thing. This is why it's so confusing, because there's drunk driving. There, if you're in Australia, they call it drink driving, alcohol impaired driving, drunk driving, DWI. There's all these terms, and so when I look at the crash data, right, I can look at all crashes, whether they were alcohol involved or not. We can filter it down to those that involved alcohol, which is again where the police officer conducting the investigation for the crash, if they suspect that a person had been drinking, or if the person is showing like signs of intoxication, and they go through with a field sobriety test, we might even have a test result, a BAC, a blood alcohol content test result for one of the drivers. All of the if again, if there's suspicion, or if there's a blood alcohol test greater than 0, that is considered an alcohol related crash. A crash involving a driver with a BAC result that was over the legal limit in Texas, which is 0.08, I would call that a crash that was yeah, a drunk driving crash. I mean, I guess
Right.
that's like probably a really good way to define it is somebody who crashed while they were legally intoxicated. Even when we look at whether it's legally intoxicated or even if alcohol is involved, the age breakdown, the age pattern is pretty consistent, and it's also consistent without alcohol at all. And it's predominantly male drivers under the age of 25. Insurance companies know this, and that's why I had
That's why you.
yeah, it's almost it lends itself to be explained by through some sort of biological explanation. I mean, males under the I mean, when you look at brain, I mean, I've heard this kind of said as brain development. Women mature quicker than men, and so they get to save some dollars for some years on their insurance. Whereas us guys have to figure out, how to drive right until we're 25. But
Yeah.
we see that same. So being young is a risk factor for being involved in a crash. Um, it's unclear though if there's something special about being young that is related to alcohol involved crashes, but it is still nevertheless consistent. If you're under the, I mean, you can even say under 30, depending on where
Yeah.
you want to line, but drivers under 30 are overrepresented in these crashes.
Hmm. That's
You know?
crazy. I just think there was a lot more prevention. I think that over the years we have gotten just so desensitized to everything. Just as recently as 2020, science has started being questioned more and dismissed, and a lot of the information we're seeing is being skewed to fit a political agenda, and I think that that harms us because we are trying to just find like information so that we can really do things. And I think that preventative measures are so important, and I feel like your work on this can help us to get more into preventative measures. So let me ask you, do you think with the information that you have had just within the past month where you were able to kind of dig into, do you think that there are preventative measures that we can implement that might help with some of these numbers to go down?
Yeah, oh yeah. Do I have it with me? Right? I do have it right here. Hang on, let me grab something to show you.
Sure.
This is a so your question is there something based on this data? Is there something that we can use to inform a prevention strategy? And the
Yes.
answer is yes. There are, I mean, we don't really have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to trying to figure out a prevention strategy. 5 minutes ago, you were describing a lot of mass media campaigns that went on in El Paso. That is one broadly any sort of media campaign. DWI Friday, I would classify that as a mass media a citywide mass media campaign. And there's a logic behind every prevention strategy, right? In mass media campaigns, the logic in how that explains people to the logic that explains how that media campaign would reduce drunk driving is in some ways trying to raise public awareness. So people who didn't realize it was against the law now know it's against the law, and the assumption is that they're going to follow the law. Or if there's like some sort of educational element, it kind of goes back to again still awareness, trying to get
Mm.
people to comply. The assumption is that people are going to comply with the law. Um, there's enforcement strategies, right, where we go off and arrest people who the police find were intoxicated and breaking the law at that point. That's one. That's all. That is one enforcement or response strategy. I wouldn't classify it necessarily as prevention because we're always only catching people committing the behavior. We're
Doing
not
it right.
right. We're not really talking about prevention. We're talking about intervention when it comes to enforcing DWI laws. Um, uh, Mass media campaigns, I would tag that more as prevention. Back in 2006, so this was 20 years ago, the U.S. Department of Justice Cops Office funded and published this little booklet. Let's see, I think it's backwards.
No,
It
it's right.
remem-
It's the right way. You're good.
yeah, so this is publicly available. This was published in 2006 by a research team led by Michael Scott, who's same name as The Office. If you watch The Office,
I was gonna say, really?
they reviewed 32 strategies, research on 32 strategies, and they summarize it very succinctly. It's essentially a really thin guidebook on how to understand and prevent drunk driving. I had the opportunity to update its second edition, and so right now we're in the process of publishing that.
Nice.
What I've reviewed across those 32 different strategies is that most of them work. Some of them do not work at all. All of them have very important implications, or considerations to keep in mind, because um, we have a shelf of prevention strategies, and it's kind of like medicine. Some of them have side
Hmm.
effects. Some of them are really expensive. Some of them don't cost anything at all. So being very thoughtful and mindful about what prevention strategy to choose is going to be important. It's also going to be important to look at our data and figure out if any of the patterns we see make sense to, any, or does it map onto any of those specific strategies. I think El Paso looks very similar to many other cities.
Okay.
I don't see anything unique in the sense that it's a problem in El Paso just like it is in other Texas cities, because I have data. We have crash data for the whole state of Texas. El Paso seems to be very similar, which would make me believe that any sort of response strategy that has worked in other places would probably work here if implemented correctly.
So it's just a matter of implementing it. Like, you know what I mean? Like
You know?
figuring out the data and implementing strategies. And I feel like that is something that is, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say this is the perfect analogy is when you go to the doctor's office with a problem, the first thing that happens is they start running all these tests, right? You have the
Mhm.
nurses or the technicians, they take your blood, they run labs, and then you have a team of people reviewing that data to try to diagnose your problem. And once they diagnose your problem, it becomes very clear what type of medicine or treatment plan that you should be on, right? And so, for example, if you went in with a bacterial infection, the doctor might prescribe you an antibiotic,
Mhm.
and it's really important to follow the instructions, right, to do the full course. That's the implementation challenge here, is like assuming
Mhm.
people are going to follow the plan before them, and as we know, many people will not follow a plan. That's the hardest part in all this. If we come up with a prevention strategy in El Paso, we have to be intellectually honest as to whether we can actually pull this thing off,
Mhm.
because sometimes it just doesn't happen. It's human error, or we just don't, something fails, and it's really important to document that because it helps us learn moving forward. Um, and essentially, there's three things that go on, right? You diagnose the problem, you come up with a treatment, and then the third thing that's super important is you're going to go back to the doctor and you're going to repeat all those tests because they're going to
Mhm.
try to figure out if it works or not. And that's the same thing with DWI prevention or drunk driving prevention, is that we have to implement a treatment or an intervention strategy, a prevention strategy, and we have to have some sort of evaluation component. If we are missing that evaluation component, we're going to be having a conversation like this 10 years later,
Yeah.
and we're going to be talking about those checkpoints that happened in the 90s, and we're going to have no clue if they worked or not. It is going to be
Yeah.
a myth, and it'll be a myth as to whether it worked or not. And so it's so important to have that documentation of did it work, did it not work, and by how much.
Yeah. No, I think that's the main thing, right? Is we have the data, and city council here locally in El Paso, they brought I think Representative Nino brought
Mm-hmm.
a resolution for the city manager to take 90 days to compile data and, prevention strategies and things that maybe we can implement. I like that because yes, it's working towards something, right? But then we need to keep holding them accountable, and we need to follow up, because I think what happens is everything sounds good and perfect and fine. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to do this work. And then, like you said, there's a lot of shit going on. Well, you didn't say that, but like there's a lot of shit going on. The city manager has a lot of things on their plate. The
Yeah.
city has a lot of things going on, and it's a prioritizing what's important, right? And what can be fiscally uh done and what can't be done. But I think that using your data, there are things that can be implemented right now, today.
Right. Yeah.
And the my big thing is the campaigns. I see representatives go on their social media and they are talking about all kinds of things, right? And well, why don't you get on your social media and put out public service announcements on the dangers of drinking and driving? Highlight some of the things that people can do responsibly. Get a keymaster when you're having a party. Take the keys. Maybe there's things that we can start implementing today. Now, each individual city council representative can do their own thing. I think that the 90-day strategy is great, but I am really wanting to see actual change being implemented. And this brings me to the human side of it, right? We're desensitized to so much of this. Every weekend, every day, there's drunk driving occurrences happening here, specifically locally. I'm sure everywhere, but I'm talking more so here, where you're seeing it on FitFam. And we don't think about the families that are affected by this, right? And I did an interview with the Sober Streets movement, and the Sober Streets movement is a local nonprofit that was created out of the worst possible circumstances, because it's all families who have lost their loved ones to drunk driving, that they were involved in accidents. They were killed by drunk drivers. That's what it is. And so I think that we need to get to a place where I don't think people realize how much it impacts families after the fact, right? So, as far as, not only have they lost their loved one, but now they're having to go to court. They're having to relive it. They're not getting closure. I think that if we put that in the front of our minds, and that the city does that as well, and the state does that, that's when you start to maybe implement change, because you can be affected by it, impacted by it, even if it's not directly happening to your family. So I think that it's very important that we talk about the human side of it.
I was going to say they've affected me. I've
Yeah.
had conversations with right with the person who founded it, Lupe, and
Lupe.
she has made me remarkably more sensitive to the realities, the limitations of the data. Um, and I think initially my perspective on this is constantly changing. And what I've gotten from their group is that we not only need to really we need to focus on prevention, right? Because that's really what's the root cause
Yeah.
of their movement and the problems. But we also have to think about, yes, there's going to be, on average, there's about 3 families that are going to lose somebody to in an alcohol related traffic fatality in El Paso. So that every month there's about 3 families that have to deal with this, and having some at the bare minimum, some sort of plan or resources that are readily available to them, is so important, because we know what's coming.
Yeah.
Every weekend every weekend I think it's crazy, but we have at least one traffic fatality every week in El Paso. That's just broadly. But again, it's the number of people, the loss of life in El Paso, um, due to an alcohol related traffic fatality, is about the same as a homicide. So it's around 20 every year. Um, it's a serious problem in the region. I mean, this is something that we can all stand behind. And to your point, yes, there are 20 families every year that need services, that need help. And one of the ideas that I'm going to see them later on today, I want to bring up an idea that I had where, imagine this is just like a rough draft idea, but imagine having a map on a website, and on this map you have all these dots, and every dot, if you click on it, it's some agency or nonprofit organization that helps families going through this problem. Whether it's they have a family member that they just lost and they need free counseling or something like that, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. I mean, there's an economic impact, there's a mental health impact, there's all these ways that we can help serve these people. And so I was thinking having some sort of service map would be helpful, and just something, I don't know.
Yeah. I
But
got you. We'll talk a little bit more after this because I've been kind of working on something. They changed my not my perspective on it because I always they just brought again, we're so desensitized. We see it every weekend. We see it every weekend. And when I had them on and I was talking to them, and man, it was just crushing, and like it's preventable. It's these young lives that have been taken. They're all young lives that were taken. Eileen, her sister was Angelique, 18 years old, lost her life on New Year's. And, it's like these are young kids that are losing their lives on something that is preventable, in my opinion.
I would say the injuries as well. Some people
The
survive these.
injuries, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, the injuries. I think too, like using the data, and you see these people, I see people who are entrepreneurs out there listening. We see people wanting to start bars all the time. I see coffee shops popping up everywhere. Let's use your entrepreneurship and let's start creating safe rides. Let's figure out ways to get a bus fleet or something, and you work together with the bars and you bring home people safely. I think there is a couple of them starting to pop up that I've seen recently. I think there might be one. I don't know the name of it, but I'll look it up and then I'll mention it.
The
In the
buzz ones.
Yeah, is that what it is?
I saw the. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I saw that. That they. I think I contacted them a while ago because I was like, hey,
Is
this is
that
a
what?
good idea.
Yeah, I owned a bar, and I focused so heavily on non-alcoholic drinks before the like trend came through of non-alcoholic drinks. Yeah, we
Yeah.
did serve alcohol, but I mean, we really never got up and running because my drinking age to get into the bar was 25 and over. I wasn't letting anyone under 25 coming in. That was kind of an issue. Um, I just think that there's certain things that we can be doing or that bars can also do to make things a little bit safer. I think that so I was trying to be a responsible bar owner, and I know that there's a bunch of them that are, but there's some that there is not, right? So I won't get into that because it's a whole nother show to do that. But I think that together we need to come together, work on prevention, implement things, and yeah, entrepreneurs make these things happen. Like where we are getting shuttles to and from bars. Party buses are great. But yeah, I think just finding safe ways to get home. Um, is this problem really that hard to solve? Or is it just a matter of, based on the data, a matter of like really digging in and saying, no, we're going to fix this?
It. I think it's. We have to have what's called a paradigm shift. In how we. There's a very traditional approach to addressing drunk driving in El Paso. We've all. This isn't something new. It to me it feels. I'm from El Paso. I've seen the press conferences over the past 10 years. It feels like we're stuck in the mud,
Mm-hmm.
like every year we always have this conversation pops up. There's some high profile fatality. It
Mm-hmm.
sparks there's anger, and the anger fuels some sort of change that is demanded by the public, and then it just kind of repeats again and again and again. I think that is the tradition that we've kind of established. And what I'm really excited to see is right. We have a city council that is bringing up data and thinking about how data fits into this problem. What we are talking about now is not doing the traditional approach anymore. We're talking about what I would call an evidence-based approach, where the way this could play out, right? The way I hope this plays out is that we are going to start becoming a self-learning community where we're going to learn about ourselves in a way we've never done before. And what that means is we're going to come up with an idea just like we've done in the past on how to prevent drunk driving. We're going to give it our best shot, and we're going to evaluate whether it works or not. And if it doesn't work, we're going to commit ourselves to not blaming the people who made the strategy, right? We're not going to attack our politicians. or our local representatives or the police department and say you did something to try to solve this and it didn't work. What we're going to do is we should see that as a success, that we documented something that didn't work, and we're going to try again and keep repeating this over and over again. And if those iterations go on long enough, by the third or fourth or fifth strategy, we might hit something that really works, and we will
Yeah.
have documented evidence to show that this strategy works, and we can start really making a measurable impact on this problem. Not only that, when 15, 20 years from now, when the circumstances change, right, when technology changes the way life is lived in El Paso, we can go back to this body of knowledge that we've created, and we can see, oh, look, back in 2026, they implemented a strategy and it worked back then. Let's try to adapt it for today's context and
Mm.
see if it works. That's really what this is about. It's not about a lot of people have great ideas, but we really have to evaluate them. If
Yeah.
we're not evaluating them, we're just we're patting ourselves on the back and making ourselves feel good. We're not doing anything to actually address the problem, and that's such an
Mm.
important distinction. You brought it up with, sometimes it feels like we have this big effort and then nothing happens. It kind of just fizzles out. We have to make sure we're evaluating and
Yeah.
documenting these strategies in a way that we can learn from. And that was the whole point of me evaluating DWI Friday. I'll try to give you the quick key points here, because there's if you really want to get into it, I have a 30-page paper on how I went about evaluating this. But you have this well-intended strategy, right? A mass media campaign. You have the police department every week in a measurable way, right? They upload these photos, community group FitFam taking these photos and distributing them weekly on their Instagram account. I was able to look over the course of 1 year across 52 posts, and I could see how many. For one, I could actually verify that every week there were posts going on. I could see the number of interactions, right? The comments. I have all this data on this intervention strategy for a full year, and because FitFam and the police department implemented this in a consistent way, I was able to evaluate it and document whether it, at least try to give it my best shot in trying to evaluate whether it worked or not. And so, that is the whole point here, is that whether, we have to remember that it is, the bottom line is we just need to evaluate these. That's like I keep saying that over and over like a broken record, but we have to evaluate these strategies, because in that analysis, I found that, did it work? Well, if there isn't evidence of a reduction, it's a very small reduction. I think it ranged anywhere from about 4 to 6%. And it was predominantly within the first 3 months. Within the first three
Mm.
months, we saw a decline. And then after that, it looked just like any other month that we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
So this evaluation, right, we learned something from it. We found that it was effective for the first 3 months. And when you break out the outcome that I analyzed, it was predominantly drivers 31 and older. Drivers that were 30 and younger, there was no measurable impact on the amount of times that they were crashing, which is important, right? Because now we're learning about, okay, this strategy, even though it's citywide, it's actually really impacting a certain group, and it's not impacting the high risk group that we really want to change. And so now this kind of gives us, this might inspire new ways to think about DWI Friday. It might be, well, how can we get this campaign or media campaign to shift and focus and tap into the attitudes of young adults in El Paso.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll stop there.
No, it's like no, you're good. It's like the algorithm, right? We need an algorithm created. We need content created for each of the demographics that we're trying to hit. And I think that's what I was thinking when you said that it had an impact in the older drivers. And again, if you think about what I was saying with the Dare, with the Full House things, the more you know, all of that stuff was stuff we had in our head. So seeing the photos and seeing all of those things probably
Yeah.
brought them back, and that's why it was so impactful within that age group. Younger kids now, or younger people now, are so desensitized to a lot of these things because video games, things on TV are a lot more graphic, it's crazy. So I think when they see those images, it doesn't impact them as much because they're more of a tunnel vision, I would say, as far as if it's not impacting me directly, then I'm fine. And I think that the media campaigns seriously need to work on um creating those algorithms and creating the content that's going to be hitting the demographic that you're wanting to hit. Like you can't and again, that's going to cost money because you're having to create different content for the demographic that you're trying to hit, right? Or the message, I guess.
And it might even be more cost effective because again, right, the data shows it's not the whole city. It's really a specific group of people that is most at risk. And so rather than, spend resources trying to impact everybody that, yeah, I mean, we're not going to imagine, the DWI task force going to the senior center to give a presentation on,
Right.
the dangers of drunk driving. They're not I mean, the data doesn't show that people who are 65 and older are out drinking and driving at crazy rates, that, so it's same thing with this media strategy is that you want to tailor your everything to the group that you're trying to impact, and
Yeah.
it makes it way more focused and cost effective. You're able to see huge reductions when you're focused like that. I'll say this: there's been a lot of really great what are called meta analyses or systematic reviews
Hmm.
on prevention strategies, and this is like a nerdy way of taking everything, all the evaluations of prevention strategies, and trying to summarize them. And what we know is that the best prevention strategies have multiple components. They don't put all of their eggs in one basket. They have three or four things going on at the same time.
Hmm.
Those seem to be that seems to be the best way to reduce the problem is to have
Yeah.
multiple things going on, whether it's prevention, education, media campaigns. If the police are able to pull off increased enforcement in targeted areas, all of those things going on at the same time in a very systematic way or calculated way are associated with reductions.
Yeah. No, I think, again, I think that it's something that we don't need, like you said, to reinvent the wheel on. I think it's just a matter of setting a dedicated team aside
Yeah,
and implementing these different strategies and working smarter, not harder about it. Like
yeah, that's a perfect
don't
way.
give me don't give me all of the extra information. Don't give me, like, I need to know the age, the target that we're doing, like all of these things. And I think that as the city continues to work on some of these things, that I hope that they focus on that. Keep them. Ryan Woodcraft always says, keep the main thing the main thing. And I fully believe that if we can keep the main thing here, which is prevention, awareness, um, on drunk driving, that we will see a change. And I think that the other side of it in prevention that we need to talk more about, not necessarily today, but that we just need to have a campaign on, is enabling and the mental health aspect to it. We cannot be enabling bad behavior. We cannot, if somebody that you know has been picked up on a DUI and they ask you to borrow their car, no. If you know that a family member is intoxicated and impaired and you're at a family cookout and you let them get in your car, you are partially responsible for that. Like, we need to start having more accountability individually, as well as going back to a mentality where we care for one another, we have enough empathy for one another, compassion to implement some of these things on ourselves on a personal level. And I think that El Paso is capable of doing these things. I think that we do have a brand new city council right now, with the exception of maybe three of the representatives. So I think that there is change that can be done. I think that they're open to it. I think that they need to keep the main thing the main thing. We need to use the data and target what the data is showing. And I think, like you said, it'll make more sense. It'll be more cost effective. It'll be more impactful. And we need to make it happen. I had a conversation the other day with a friend of mine who just left El Paso, moved to LA. The day before he was leaving to move to LA, he got hit by a drunk driver at 11 a.m. Like, what the hell? And it was a Thursday. Like that's
Yeah.
just that's just shit that is just bananas, and we just need to do better and be better. And Matthew, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. The data is so important, and I know that some people might be like, "Meh, data, boring," but it's so important. You mentioned meta and the analytics, and that's what the algorithms are based off of. So if you're like saying you don't like data, but you go and look at your your stats on your Instagram page or whatever it is, you're into data. So this is just important data.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Um,
thank you so much, Matthew. Go ahead. Is there anything else that you would like to share? How can people help your work? How can they contact you? And
yeah, well, you know, uh, I'm really just doing this as a passion project right now, and there's still a lot. I'm barely scratching the surface when it comes to what's inside this crash data set, right? It's publicly available. Anybody can download it. Anybody can dig through it. It's one of the things that I want to make sure people understand though is that if you start getting into, if you're, like me, you love data and you find this data set, you can go, it's publicly available on TxDOT's website. It's the CRIS query tool. You filter down the year, the Texas city that you want data on. You have everything there. Uh, Remember that it is very easy to make a chart. It is what I've learned from these past 2 months is that it's very easy to misrepresent what that data means. And so the best thing I can say is um, have a conversation. Call up the TxDOT, the district, the El Paso district office, or try to get a hold of somebody at the police department because that's ultimately, these are the two organizations that produce or manage this data. They are the best people to give you answers. Try not to make any assumptions about what you're looking at. I'm guilty of it. I'm constantly trying to correct any assumptions I'm making about a pattern I see. It's a learning process. The one last thing I guess I want to leave you, Ashlee, with and everyone else is that we have tons of ideas on how to prevent drunk driving in El Paso. All of those ideas are worthy to look into to figure out if they're feasible. Um, the biggest thing that we want to remember though is that even in our best intended efforts, there may be unintended consequences. And in terms of, for example, with DWI Friday, it is a very well intended effort. That's not in question at all. But there are some very serious unintended consequences that might come from it, ethical or even legal. And we have to be so cognizant of those because we don't want to hurt people. We want to help people. And if we find out that what we're doing isn't working or that it might be harming someone, we have to take a very serious, stop and figure out what we can do to, address any of those problems.
yeah. And it
Yeah,
comes back to accountability. Just take accountability. Look, we tried this. We're finding that this is what we're finding, and this is how we're going to pivot and fix that problem. Or,
right.
like, and I think that we have such a problem just in general of saying, I fucked up. That was my bad. I'm sorry. Like, how can it? And then like fixing the problem. We dwell so much and we focus so much on, well, it didn't work. What's the point of trying again? Blah, 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 blah. Like
Mm.
our brains are just wired that way, and we need to change that. And a lot of that goes to mental health, working on your mental health and things like that.
I'll just say this very quickly, is that we often think about drunk driving in very criminal legalistic terms. We think of a crash where someone was drunk and someone dies. We tend to think of it as a victim and an offender. And those are legal terms. It's very clear who these people are in a legal setting and who is legally responsible. But if you remove those labels, right? If you remove those labels, what you're looking at is a happening, an incident that occurred, and you can it's instead of like again using this legal lens, you remove that lens and you look at it through a mental health lens. You very quickly see the drunk driver as somebody who needed help,
Yeah.
and that is like that is a totally different way of looking at this problem. And I think we have so much to learn if we were to adopt that lens. And I think there's plenty of organizations in El Paso that know way more about that than I do that can really do some serious good on trying to
Yeah.
address some of these root cause problems. or root cause events that lead to people to drink and drive.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, again, just speaking personally, I know how I used alcohol as a coping mechanism because I had poor mental health and because I was struggling and I had depression and I had anxiety. I had postpartum, like all of these things. So I know that it's something that is very interconnected. And I will definitely be kind of diving more into that. But yeah, again, Matthew, just thank you so much for taking the time to come on, for sharing your perspective. I always appreciate when people are willing to look beyond like the assumptions, beyond, like you said, just the kind of labels, and understand truly why things are happening in our community or why people are doing things. I am like that. I like to figure out, well, what caused this chain of events to happen. And I think the work that you're doing is so important. To anyone listening, if this episode taught you something new, please share it with somebody. Awareness is important. Having these hard conversations is important. But the real change does not happen until we take all of the information and what we've learned and turn it into something that we can do with it, right? Talking about it is the first step, but real change begins to happen when we implement action. So, y'all, if somebody that you know is in crisis, make sure that you dial 988 for the helpline. You can also text them. For other mental health resources, you can visit talkingaboutit.com. I've created a kind of hub where you can go find different avenues for mental health resources, primary care resources, and the list is growing. So, yeah, just remember to keep on talking about the hard things, but start making change. Thank you so much, Matthew.
It was lovely speaking with you, Ashlee. I really enjoyed this, and it really helps me having conversations like this better understand what I'm doing. So and how it matters. So thank you.
It truly does matter. And you can find him on Instagram at the EP Crime Lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. Yeah. And so make sure if you have statistic questions, data questions, you all reach out to Matthew because he is amazing at finding out that information. We have some really cool episodes coming up in recognition of men's mental health. So stay tuned. I'll be posting everything on Instagram. Again, we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.